This is Cold Start.
And for today's topic, something that's very interesting, and I'm sure that gets every race fan so excited to talk about, BoP, balance of performance. Something that we talk about mainly in endurance racing when we talk about GT3 class racing or LMP1 or GTP or hypercar, whatever you want to call it, between IMSA and WEC. Basically, this balance of performance concept allows multiple different manufacturers and different types of cars to race against one another. But the biggest question, and us race fans like to argue about things, is this a necessary evil, or does it kind of take away from what the racing represents?
There's a point where we want racing to be fair. For there to be a sporting competition, everybody has to have sort of an equal chance, or at least equal rules applied for what they need to do to accomplish the goal of the race, how fast to drive, what kind of car to bring, what those things are. We've defined classes of vehicles as an acknowledgement of the fact that cars are different, but we can kind of group them together where their characteristics might be similar regarding racing. We're talking about power and speed and aerodynamics and other factors. So how do we make this fair when a class of cars might have wildly variable amounts of horsepower or weight for those cars, but still allow them to go racing together?
Yeah, so IMSA or WEC, WEC, determined balance of performance or BoP primarily through data-driven collection from these vehicles, analyzing the car's performance using metrics like lap time, telemetry, aerodynamics, wind tunnel testing. They take in a lot of information from the manufacturers that create these homologated race cars, as well as race data. So as these cars race over a handful of races, all of the officials will be collecting data from the vehicles. They'll download them. They'll see if one car had any sort of potential advantage or anything like that, and then be able to make adjustments, whether that's restrictors, how much power the engine's putting out, or with ballast, adding additional weight to the vehicle, or even adjusting things like aerodynamics, wing angles, downforce, stuff like that, just trying to make things equal. Now, this topic of creating rules within racing, we talked about in previous episodes, like Can-Am, when you throw the rulebook out the window, or even GT1, where you open up this rulebook. And yes, it makes really interesting and exciting race cars and things that we talk about for generations after, but like we talked about, those series don't last for very long. They're really, really exciting, but they kind of burn themselves out. And we know within motorsports, the type of mindset, the innovation that happens amongst engineers, if you don't create a structure, a framework for these people to exist within, they kind of go too far. And BoP is the other direction of, let's keep things constrained. Let's not let one team get a bigger advantage over anyone else. Let's not have a Porsche situation where they just dominate the season for year after year, but keeping things relatively equal amongst the cars.
Yeah, where one party goes too far, that's not a great recipe for fun. You know, you always have that one friend everybody kind of holds at arm's length because they never know where the boundaries are and they always take it too far. You're out partying or doing something. They go well over the line. Like that's not a place you want to put yourself. So if you're going to go out and try to race, you're spending all this money and investing all this time and energy into try to being successful at a thing that we ostensibly say is a fair competition. We all need to have an equal chance to get out there, but let's face it, not all the parties who are participating in racing are equal. Manufacturers with huge budgets and multi-billion-dollar amounts of assets and inventory have a totally different perspective on what it takes to be able to build and how much money they can spend versus a privateer or a small company that's just starting out building their own race car, taking components and commodity pieces together to try to make their cars work within the rule set that has been given. So there's a wild amount of variation that can occur in the design and just the mechanism by which cars get built. Just the organizations behind those cars are all pretty different, even if they're going to be competing together.
Yeah, to give you guys a little bit of history behind BoP and this concept of trying to make different cars compatible to compete against one another, we'll give you a little bit of the history of how BoP came about within endurance racing. Now, this concept of trying to make cars equally competitive predates BoP and the concept of BoP, but balance of performance as we know it today, it started all the way back in 2006, where it started getting implemented into GT3 class racing. So GT3 cars is probably the most prevalent of like, yeah, an Aston Martin is different than a Corvette, is different than a Porsche, is different from a BMW. And there's things that need to be done to make sure that those cars are equally competitive amongst one another. Now, this started to progress in 2012. They expanded it to the WEC GTE category, once again, still dealing with GT cars for the most part. And then in 2018 and 2019, it expanded into the prototype category, which is interesting to say because we think about prototype racing and prototype race cars as there really kind of aren't rules. Like, it's a prototype. We're supposed to explore the limits. We're not supposed to be bound by restrictions. But in that era, 2018, 2019, there was the EOT, which was the equivalence of technology, which was essentially a form of BOP that was trying to help bridge the gap between non-hybrid and hybrid technology cars as there was a change in the drivetrains in that era. And then the most recent addition to BOP was in 2021, where we had the creation of Hypercar, the racing series Hypercar, or in America as we know it, GTP, right? And that's where that final addition to another BOP class was created. Now, this whole concept of BOP, you might be thinking, well, like, it all sounds very positive, right? Like, I want to see different looking race cars race against one another and be competitive and not just have one team run away with the championship year after year. Like, what's the drawback? Why are people so mad about BOP? And especially since nowadays we look at the IMSA fields and the WEC fields, and we have a huge amount of cars competing, whether that's within Hypercar or GTP.
Right.
There's a massive amount of cars competing. Same thing with GT3, GTD. There are so many cars racing in endurance racing now that, like, how could you argue against the success of BOP in bringing the competition back to endurance racing?
It's true. They're out there and they're having to deal with these factors and race together in what are different designs. And we appreciate the fact that in the prototype class, the cars look a little different at the highest level at Hypercar, LMP1, GTP level. It's interesting to differ then at the LMP2 level. That's effectively a spec series. They're all running the same chassis and the same engines. So it's a completely different world here in the top level of prototype racing, at least in the past. This also applied to the GT1 world, right, where we sort of uncapped the rules a little bit to allow for innovation and really just to see what the upper bound of cars' performance and overall capability would be. So it's really interesting to see how this has sort of evolved with time. This goes way back. You know, we were talking about the history of the 24 Hour of Le Mans and how back in 1930, Mercedes' first race, there was a crude form of not quite BOP, but a way to make equivalence across cars that had wildly different engine sizes and weights, to the point where, based on engine size and minimum vehicle weights, ballast was being added to these cars. And back in the day, the kind of ballast they were adding was actually in the form of sandbags. And fast forward to today, the term that we use when somebody is making it like they have less capability than they actually have, or faking that they're undercapable in some way, we call that sandbagging. That was literally the result of a team who was performing so well that we put penalties into their car to make it heavier for them to race. And the flip side of that is a team underperforming to avoid having extra weight put in their car. That term today we call, in a general way, sandbagging.
So let's get into where people might dislike BOP, or the opinions. What is the opinions on BOP, and why is this so common to be a topic of discussion amongst endurance racing fans? Because from my perspective, I think BOP is kind of annoying in a lot of ways. And this conversation that we have to even have conversations about BOP is annoying.
Yeah, I mean, is it a race or not? Is the winner the one who crosses the finish line fastest or not? What is it that we have as a requirement that makes us add this magic dust on top, that we have to have humans involved in computing how we're going to configure the cars in order for them to be able to race fairly together? I mean, isn't that what the rules are for? Isn't that what the definition of this class of vehicles is for? To say, within this envelope, you're free to design and innovate and create a machine that meets these qualifications, meets these requirements and regulations, but from there, your goal is to go out there and drive as fast as you can and try to win. And this BOP concept comes in and interferes with that. It takes away that sense of racing is just fair head-to-head competition, and now there's a sanctioning body. There are race stewards and officials who are going to influence the outcome of races based on the amount of power, the amount of restrictions, And BOP that we apply to these cars, it just doesn't seem particularly fair. And as racing has gotten more complicated with prototype cars and GT cars, with hybrid powertrains, with aerodynamics being so effective, all these things get more and more complicated to try to make equivalence classes out of. I mean, we have power, we have weight, we have aero, we also have fuel, right? How much fuel you're allowed to take on board. Fuel has a weight. How long can you run on a single tank of gas? How efficient are you with the use of that fuel? The total capacity and the blend or the mix of those fuels. And we're starting to see a little bit of that now between combustion engines and hybrid power. And it's gotten to the point where it's no longer just a way to say, fine, the power to weight ratio of your car is different than another, so we're going to make an adjustment. We're actually starting to look at the data that's being collected over multiple races, all of that telemetry that comes off of cars, steering angles and brake pressure traces and all that kind of stuff is being used in this feeling like a black box kind of way to determine what the factors are for each of the cars that are performing or racing in these series. It just doesn't seem fair, right? This is an attempt to make things more fair, but we're going to, in an opaque way, make these secret adjustments. Okay, fine, we reveal the adjustments later, but not the rationale that went into them. Like, we only know the outputs of this equation. We don't really know all the factors that were inputs or the weightings that were given. And it just doesn't come off as fair or right or allowing us all to enjoy motorsports for what it potentially could be. We're artificially constraining it in this way in the name of fairness.
I just think that it's too many knobs to turn.
Totally.
There's too many options of what to adjust between the vehicles. Now, every time that I'm in the paddock of an IMSA race, I was just down at Laguna Seca not too long ago when IMSA came, the GTPs, GT3s, and the GT4 racing, all of which have BOP restrictions upon them. And it just always seems like the topic of discussion is like the changes in BOP, like what the Toyota's got, what the Porsche's got comparative, or, oh, the Mustang's got a real big advantage in BOP this weekend, or whatever the case is. And it's kind of frustrating of like, that's the discussion we're having as motorsport fans and drivers, racers, teams, whatever, is like all of these knobs that the sanctioning body is turning. It just seems like a dull conversation, and two, a dangerous conversation of like that the competition is so reliant upon what the organizers want to decide. And I think a big distinction to make here for those who are listening is, yes, racing needs rules. I get that. I totally agree with that there needs to be restrictions to limit how much people can be innovative, bend the rules, go into a gray area. But the big thing that BOP is different comparative to kind of how groups or racing classes were set up back in the day was, back then it was, here's the rules for the season. Here's what you need to abide by. This is how you need to build your car. And then we get to go race for a season. And if someone does something that might be a little bit outside the rules are going to change for the next season. But with BOP, it's kind of a rolling change. And mid-season, they can make adjustments with the cars. And so like it's almost like race to race, you're always chasing what's happening with the BOP. And like maybe there's even like a strategy of like sandbagging one race weekend to then get a massive advantage the next race to then be dominant at one race versus the other. And it just seems like there's too much political touching going on.
Yeah, it seems like we're hyper-optimizing. We're trying to make the outcome something very specific and precise and fooling ourselves to think that we have the data necessary to do it in an objective way. Yet humans are necessary to make the decision. It just doesn't quite make sense. This is one of those cases where we're letting perfect be the enemy of good. We have this amazing opportunity with all these teams coming out to race because the current set of rules at high level are really, really great. And a lot of manufacturers want to participate. We now have more overlap between the rules in WEC and in IMSA than we've had before. So teams are able to really approach their endurance racing on a global basis and participate all around the world. And you think that would foster this sense that like things are getting better and closer and all of that. But we have these factors that continue to adjust and weigh what's happening on a race-by-race basis. And maybe that's part of this too. Teams have their setups for road courses or street setups or ovals that are different. Well, now we're looking at BOP that's changing race by race. You were at the race in Long Beach and you were at the race at Laguna. Yeah, those are very different tracks, but should the cars be fundamentally different that are driving Laguna from those that are driving Long Beach. Yes, setup can be different, but the amount of weight in the car, the amount of power in the car, why can't we just have those cars run at different diverse tracks? And the results will differ from track to track because the nature of cars performing in certain environments will be different. And that's part of what makes this also exciting and unpredictable. We don't want predictable outcomes. And I think BOP is there because, let's face it, the manufacturers with the most money, who can spend the most on their program, have the most potential to create the most powerful or efficient car and have an unfair advantage. But, well, isn't that the case in life and everything else? Like the person who spends more could have the bigger, nicer, faster, whatever thing. But this is racing. We're trying to make it fair. So these things are inherently at odds.
Right. I think there is a challenging duality to it. But the point that you brought up, I think, is maybe where my mindset is at the most, because we have these different cars and they race different. They have different advantages, whether the BMW has more torque than a Porsche, but the Porsche is lighter than a BMW, whatever it is. I'm not saying that that's the reality, but one of those cars is going to be better suited for one track versus the other. And like you're saying, you go race at Long Beach and say you win Long Beach, which means maybe now you're going to get a penalty in the form of BOP, which is ballast, or they're going to pull some power or whatever. But now you go to Laguna and you're like, well, my car wasn't going to be better suited for Laguna. It was better at Long Beach. It's going to suck at Laguna. But now, not only is the car not suited for Laguna, now on top of that, I get a disadvantage of BOP. So it's kind of like, is there a better way to like set these cars up in the beginning of the season where it's like, all right, the Cayman's the better handling car, maybe less power. The BMWs might have better top speed, but they're a little bit heavier, so they're not as good at handling. Same thing with the Mustangs. Like, in video games when you get your first car, and it's like, this one has the most power, but it sucks at handling. Or this one has the best handling, but it has low top speed. You have advantages and disadvantages. And
I mean, even Mario Kart's like that.
Yes, whichever character you choose. And so, like, is there a way that we can create these cars that they do inherently have differences, but that's what makes for an exciting season, where it's like, hey, this is not where we're going to be strong at. This is where we are going to be strong at. And then that way there's different winners from race to race just based on like what the car is and what the track that we're going to. And, I don't think that BOP is inherently an evil thing, because I don't want racing to be who can spend the most amount of money, because that's the quickest way to kill off a series. But also I don't want it to be like we're having these long, lengthy technological discussions about BOP between race. Like, if that is the top thing that we're talking about, then the racing isn't exciting enough.
It just makes the racing feel artificial. Like we need these outside factors to somehow change the outcomes that are naturally occurring otherwise. And yeah, sure, track to track, we make changes in the cars, but to be doing it on that regular of a basis, I mean, when they're computing BOP from race to race, are they taking into consideration this is a street circuit? The conditions and the attributes of these cars in a street circuit are going to be different than on a road course. And what about a road course with a lot of elevation versus a road course that's very flat with a lot of long straights versus a lot of twisty turns and chicanes and so forth, right? Those are inherently different. And I think we're all fooling ourselves as humans if we think we're so good at this that we can get it right and we're going to predict, or even with the use of computers and algorithms and AI, like they're going to get it right to make a better product of racing, which is inherently a variable thing, a subjective thing, a thing that changes day to day and hour to hour, and you have a good day or a bad day, and the mechanical gods were with you that day and they were smiling on you or they weren't. These are all things that make variability in racing and why it's so exciting. If you went out every time, it was always the Porsche 963 that was always in front because they had the most money to spend, they had the most powerful car, the best everything. That would not be interesting. That would no longer be racing. That would be an exhibition.
Right. And to go further on this, of the evolution of BOP, like it was introduced back in 2006 and it's changed a lot through the years. And arguably, I would say that BOP has gotten better in its decisions, and these officials have gotten better in the changes that they've made, because I remember maybe 5 years ago, a little bit more than 5 years ago, especially in the GT4 category of IMSA, whether that was the Michelin Pilot Sport Challenge or whatever it was called previously. Right. But in that class of racing, I remember that like each year was like, oh, this year the Caymans are going to be strong.
Yeah.
And everyone would go out and buy a Cayman GT4. And then the next year was like, the Aston Martins are going to be strong. So then everyone went out and bought an Aston Martin GT4. And so like, it was bad back then.
This is like tradition in racing.
But like it was terrible in the sense of like BOP wasn't really working. Like there was a clear advantageous car to be in.
That's true.
And people would go out and buy that car. And now it's like if you were the team to be able to afford that, it's awesome because now you can have the competitive advantage. But it was all the teams that had all the money that were able to make those changes. And if you were one of those other teams, you were kind of SOL and just you had to deal with it for the season. So I think it's gotten better. Like the racing that I've seen within IMSA with BOP, it's gotten a lot better. And they always pride themselves when they have a race where you have multiple manufacturers in the top 5. And it's gotten really good. And another example that I think that BOP is being really successful is, and we were just talking about this, the 6 hours of Spa, which just recently happened. So now we're talking about WEC, basically the European cousin of IMSA, or IMSA being the American cousin of WEC, whichever one you want to have the dominant. But watching that race with the hypercars, there was phenomenal door-to-door race. After 6 hours, there was a 4-way battle for the lead of different make hypercars.
Yes.
From different teams.
Not a spec series.
Side by side, it was the BMW, the Ferrari, the Toyota, and the Aston Martin Valkyrie. 4 very different cars, looked very different.
Yeah.
All 4 different manufacturers, but competing door to door and putting on a phenomenal show. So like there is an example of like, hey, BOP is working because we are able to see these drastically different cars that look arguably really cool, putting on a really good show.
And it's the reason we come up with racing classes. We're like, these aren't exactly the same, but they're kind of enough like each other that we can put them together. That's what we wanted. You remember we were talking about Can-Am and it was so exciting about the amount of innovation that was happening and how wildly different the cars look because of all of the new inventions and approaches that were being taken. And people were trying things that were risky because they didn't know if it would work or not. And they were just incentivized to do that. That pretty much is over in BOP regulated classes because the restrictions are so great that the penalties for going outside of what's expected are wild. And it's not just the amount of weight you have in your car. Like we think about ballast as, they put these iron weights or they put in sandbags or whatever it is to make your car weigh more. They'll restrict the power. They put on these plates on your intake or on your turbo to literally physically restrict the amount of air that can get into the engine, which reduces power. They'll also do aero changes. They'll require you to have a different wing angle or a different ride height or mandate certain types of body work or the amount of drag and downforce your car has. Or even this new thing, which is the most confusing to me, that's a more recent addition. There's 2 different levels of maximum power allowed, depending on the car's speed versus the one previous sort of power to weight ratio that they were looking at. So there's a stage 1 power, which is, I guess, the lower speed, and then the stage 2 power, which is higher speed, so ostensibly like long straightaway tracks, Cirque du Sarthe, Le Mans kind of a case, versus a tight twisty course where they would be looking more at the lower speed stage 1 BOP. I can hardly get my head around it, and when you look at the actual published results of BOP for a race, they do put this information out. It's like 12 columns wide, the name of the team and their model, and then their minimum mass and their maximum power and the energy and the fuel and the V1 power versus V2 power. And already it's making me kind of dizzy looking at all these numbers. I just want to see whose car is going to be fastest and know who's racing the best. And with all these extra factors, I can't really tell.
And I think that's like the perfect representation of the duality of BOP and why so many people argue one side or the other. Because even myself talking about this, it's like, yeah, BOP is kind of lame because of the technological side of it of like, I don't want to be talking about technical charts or read through a 12-page document from IMSA or WEC about what's happening next race. To me, that's lame. I just want good racing. And the other flip side of saying like, okay, maybe BOP is a good thing is we have big fields and close racing that's coming out of it. So I think like that's why this is such a polarizing topic is on one end, it seems like there is the potential for corruption, I guess, from like the sanctioning body of making choices if they want to prefer one team over the other.
Yeah.
They have too many knobs to turn, and whether it's low power, high power, how much hybrid system, how much fuel you're allowed, this, that, the other. Like there's too many ways that they can kind of manipulate the race and the racing that's going on track. But then also on the flip side, like what we're experiencing in the modern day era, I would argue in endurance racing is a golden era of endurance racing, of the amount of teams, the amount of cars, the competition, everything that's happening right now in WEC and IMSA is phenomenal. And Can you say that that's a direct result from BOP? I don't think so. Maybe not. Maybe, right? There might be an argument there, but like
They coexist.
and it's just an interesting thing of you can argue of the black magic behind the wall, conspiracy theory, what's going on with BOP and benefiting one team or the other, or you can just look at the racing and be like, is it producing good racing or not? But it's an interesting topic either way you slice it.
Yeah, I guess if there was a feeling we had one universal objective truth, which this is the BOP and we figured it out and it's right and it applies and it does make for a more fair outcome. It's not just the richest team that's always winning. Like, I don't think any of us would be complaining about that. But the fact is, IMSA and the ACO, who's the sanctioning body under FIA that does WEC, right? They apply different BOP calculations for the same car across these two series. So the GTE car over here in IMSA gets different BOP ratings than the GTE car over here in WEC. That seems completely wrong. Like, what is it about those situations that are so different? The tracks are different, I guess. Maybe some of the drivers are different.
Yeah, I would. That's a very curious thing to bring up because when I was watching Spa, like the Valkyries over in Europe are really competitive.
Right.
And then the Valkyrie that's over here in the States that's racing in IMSA has never been competitive. And it's kind of like, all right, what formulas are they figuring out over in Europe that they're not figuring out over in the States? Do those two bodies even talk to one another of what they're doing with BOP? Because it seems like they're on different pages because, like, they have the same cars in the U.S. that they have over in Europe. We
Yes.
just don't have some of the extra ones that they have over in Europe.
Right.
I thought that was really interesting. Why are these two bodies deciding or making different decisions? Like, why wouldn't you, like, come together? If these cars are the same, just because one exists in Europe and one exists in America, you think they would share the data to make them equal, or like you're saying, is it track dependent or whatever?
Yeah, and there's different approaches here. You know, there's another series, SRO, that runs GT3, GT4 cars. They have 2 BOP sessions, effectively tests, a year at a single track. They do it at the Circuit Paul Ricard in the south of France. So they have these cars driven by drivers who have already competed in them in order to assess the BOP of each car at a regulated single place. And then they use that to apply more broadly to other races.
See, and even with that, like, I've heard stories of teams that'll show up to those tests and sandbag the cars.
Absolutely.
And then at that point, they get an advantageous BOP, at least for the first race, right? You can't hide your crappy performance all season long, but
Right.
especially at Daytona, for, you know, the 24 Hours of Daytona or even the GT4 race at
Yeah.
Daytona, for all of the practice sessions,
The roar, yeah.
you could just like sandbag each session, make yourself look terrible, get a good BOP because they have to set a BOP for the season right then and there, and then have a big advantage during the race and then get penalized for the next one.
Yeah, then you ask yourself, are you better off sandbagging through practice and quali and starting at the back of the pack and having to use your advantage that hasn't been discovered to get through the pack? Or,
Oh yeah, you have plenty of time during an endurance race.
right, you don't need to throw it down in quali, so maybe they don't pick up on that. But then they're going to figure out that, wow, you made up a lot of places during the race. Now they're getting smarter. They're going to start to look at why is it that you were able to make up all that distance through the field when, based on power and balance of performance, it looked like you shouldn't have been able to do that, right? Then they'll make an adjustment. So,
Well, going off of that of like now my conspiracy theory mindset of like big government here, it's like at what extent does BOP adjustments have limitations where if we're adjusting from race to race, why can't IMSA hit a button during the middle of the race being like, hey, that car looks like it has an advantage. Let's shut down power. Which,
Yeah.
I mean, it wouldn't come to that because they can't control the cars mid-race. But like, I'm saying like this is the big brother scenario of like, where is the end of BOP and the control over the vehicles of like, do they get too ingrained and too involved in the adjustments?
down the road, it's probably the AI race stewards who are making those adjustments as we go. But I agree with you. I think having an objective way to do this seems inherently better. I mean, that's kind of what IMSA is doing through this telemetry collected over multiple races. You could do other things like put a car in a wind tunnel or put it on the dyno, and you get an actual power read or an efficiency for the aerodynamics of the car, and those are just numbers. Like, you don't argue with the numbers, they're an objective fact. But the problem is, we're not just using objective fact to make these decisions, we're using inference, we're using human decision making, we're looking at a case and trend of a lot of things that are variable over time and trying to make a single decision that represents them as well as possible. And I think we just can't do that. We're just not going to get it right all the time, even using that objective data. And then, so what if we got it right this time for this track under these conditions, and then something else changed that we didn't model, right? We're always going to be chasing after what's that additional thing that we didn't quite bring into the equation, while at the end of it, aren't we all just trying to race each other and look at who was fastest? I get that we've made a lot of complexity in racing, and we have push to pass and hybrid systems and required tire change strategies and all this kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, whoever's fastest wins. Whoever covers the maximum distance over that period of time wins. So we really need to be optimizing for the performance of the cars inherent to themselves and not these extra factors that we're adding on in the name of being fair. Again, the sandbagging case exists, and there's really no way to adjudicate against that. That's just part of the equation, I guess.
So now thinking about if BOP continues, because it's going to, like, what could be the potential future or downside if BOP continues to become increasingly more strict or more involved in the series? You know, is there something within a racing series that if it has too many rules, that it can also kill it off? Because we talked about a racing series not having enough rules,
right?
And what happens there of burning too bright for a short period of time and allowing people to get away with too many things, it kills off the series and you move on. Is within a racing series, if there's too many rules, is that something that also could potentially kill it off? And what we're seeing right now, I think, you know, IMSA, WEC, everything like that, GT3 racing in general is incredibly successful because they've created a nice rule set. They've created standardization within racing, which we haven't seen before. Of if I buy a GT3 race car and I want to race it in America, then ship it over to Europe, I can do that. I don't have to modify the car. You know, back in the day, which not a lot of people recognize, there was a difference between a GTLM car and a GTD car, which was there was the Daytona rule set or the American rule set of endurance racing, and then there was the Le Mans or the European set of rule for their GT3 cars. And they were drastically different. There was different aero packages. Nowadays, we have this standardization. Now, the only thing that I think I would be concerned about in this world of BOP and standardization within GT3 cars is not creating a spec series, but like getting to the point that there isn't this excitement or innovation within GT3 racing like there used to be, right? Back in the old days, and cars looking maybe a little bit different, or, you know, exploring realms of aerodynamics, bodywork, engines, displacement, power output, whatever. And there's been good eras of GT3 racing. And same thing in prototype racing, where, like, once again, prototypes are supposed to be exploring the limits of what we can do with these cars, and that's what makes them so exciting. And if we have BOP within hypercar, does that limit what prototypes are supposed to be at Le Mans? And I don't want to, you know, complain too much because we're seeing such good fields and such strength of numbers, and same thing in hypercar for the prototype categories. But are we missing a little bit of flavor that we used to have before BOP was so prevalent?
It just kind of feels wrong, right? You just get that vibe that this artificial thing we're doing to the racing can't be making it better, can it? I mean, like, yeah, the racing is good, and we're really fortunate that the overall rule sets and the ways the stars all aligned and these multiple sanctioning bodies have agreed with one another allowed for these big fields to be out there. It also has to do with global macro factors, strong economy for a long period of time over places where these car manufacturers are, reconsolidation within the auto industry, things like that that have been changing, the amount of technology driving the automobile industry as well. All those things are factors. But at the end of this, you could say BOP is something that potentially could be abused. And there's suspicion to think that maybe it would be, right? And one person's corruption, it is another person's opportunity or optimization, right? And if you think about the Long Beach Grand Prix sponsored by Acura, where we had the Acura P1 car, right, the hypercar, the GTP car racing, that had never won their home Grand Prix before. Like, the Acura had never taken the Long Beach Grand Prix. But this year they did. Well, that's good for the series. That's good for the organizers. That's good for that team. That makes everybody look pretty good, right? That's exciting for fans. Now, that, in this case, didn't actually wind up yielding a better outcome in the writ large kind of way, because Acura has since announced that they're going to be withdrawing from hypercar and prototype racing after this series. That might have to do more with the fact that it's branded Acura versus Honda and some other things. But the fact is, it's good for a race series to get more attention. It's good for a race series to have stories like the home sponsor for this race, who, by the way, spent a whole lot of money to have their name all over this thing, had a really great result and had their first ever win at this race. It makes me a little suspicious. It makes me think about maybe it's not overt, complete corruption, but maybe there's a little bit of a thumb on the scale because it enables an outcome that's really good for everybody. And we can kind of argue at the end of the day, don't we all win if the series gets more attention and more viewers and more people are excited about what happened because this was the outcome? And maybe that one win for Acura didn't change the whole season. Like the people who are still going to win are going to win. And that one change to the BOP that may or may not have been made maybe didn't affect the outcome, or maybe it did.
Yeah, I mean, there is the piece of like BOP can be used as a corruption channel, but I mean, for me, that wouldn't be my biggest concern of like the future detriment of BOP, just because it's like if you found corruption, it's pretty easy to like eliminate the corruption. If there's someone within the organization that's being swayed one way, I know like in hindsight, it seems like it's easy just to get rid of the one person.
Abu Dhabi 2021. That dude's still there. That's all I'm going to say.
But I think the biggest thing for me with BOP is like it eliminating the creativity and innovation of the cars, right?
Yes.
Because BOP, I don't think we can argue that BOP is making the competition worse, because I think it's making it better. Because one, we have a bigger field. Two, the cars are close together, and the races have been phenomenal. The race at Laguna Seca, the battle between the first and second place for the win with a couple laps to go at Laguna was phenomenal.
Absolutely, yeah.
And it was a works team versus a privateer.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, if we want an argument for BOP, that's pretty insane that happened, right? That a privateer even beat a works team in the last couple lap battle at Laguna. So
yeah, and we want to see JDC Miller go out there and do it, right, against Penske, Porsche,
Right.
or whomever else, because the privateers represent kind of all of us, right? The common man. We're going to go out there and try to race against the big corporation and have a chance to be successful. That's the dream, right? That's such an American story.
And so, like, that's a pro point for BOP, because
Yes.
I think that's making that happen, that there isn't this huge money spend and works teams can run away with it, and the privateers are stuck in the back fighting for, sixth and seventh. So it's not an argument that BOP is, like, eliminating competition because we're getting great competition. I think it's more the fact of, the cars themselves. I don't think hypercars, because I think the GTPs and the hypercars, I think they're really interesting and I think they're cool and they look very different. And especially like the Aston Martin Valkyrie having a naturally aspirated V12, we have this crazy divergence of like what cars are out there. I think my argument more goes towards GT3 class racing, because the cars themselves, like, they don't bring a lot of spark to me. I don't know why. Like, they seem very cookie cutter of like, they're just the cars themselves with the tacked on aero, and they kind of all fit the same bill. Like they have the same cloak of GT3 on them. There's not that excitement anymore in the GT category of like crazy builds, crazy aero, that sort of deal.
Yeah, I think that's been static for quite a long time. I think the last big innovations I remember coming to GT3 were like the swan neck wing and ABS and things like that, which it's been there a really long time already. It's not that exciting. And I think to go back to another earlier conversation, we look at GT3 as this sort of ossified, like we have a pretty set standard for what these cars look like, and it's been that way for a little while, versus over in the prototype world, we're still experimenting. I mean, just a few years ago, Peugeot went out there without any wing on their car, right? They were trying to experiment with a different aero kind of approach. And we've seen experimentation with different types of fuel and all these different kinds of things at the prototype level, not so much at the GT3 level. So maybe what we need to do is we keep BOP in the place where it belongs in this GT class, where the cars are pretty much similar, but we do need this way to sort of fine-tune their equivalents.
Right.
And then we open up the cap. I mean, this is what GT1 was. This is what LMP1 was and was supposed to be, right? Was the place where we have relatively unbridled innovation and investment to continue pushing the envelope forward. And as we find new technologies that sort of land as this is the next new thing that then perpetuates throughout the field, we always see that, right? The wing that we saw on the back of the car in Can-Am one year was on half of the cars in the pack the next year out. So those kind of innovations, they do trickle down pretty quickly, and they'll trickle down from prototypes into GT cars and street cars as well eventually. So I think that's the place where we want to continue to foster innovation, stretching beyond limits, trying things in a way that maybe there is a wild disparity. And this year, that one team that came up with this amazing technological innovation, they're just going to blow doors on everyone else. And you know what? They probably deserve to, because they came out with that new technological innovation. Until other teams have a chance to catch up, they win. They came up with the better sauce. That's just, their stuff tastes better. We should just go with that. And then next year, if we want to make an adjustment, because that was so far and away better than everybody else, and there's some reason everybody else can't get on the same page as that team who had that innovation, then maybe we make some adjustment to make it fair. But I think we need to allow for that innovation, that expansion, that trying new things, especially as we bring in new technology and it gets more complicated with electronics and batteries and hybrid and energy recovery and fuel mixes and all this kind of stuff and stage 1 versus stage 2 power. It's already getting too confusing. So fine, let that world be what it is, but let's go back to sort of the earlier principles of uncapping the innovation and the upper bound of what those GT1, LMP1, hypercar, GTP type classes can be. And then fine, we'll apply BOP to those other groups that need it to make sure that we have a better overall product. I think we can live in a world where there's both of those things.
I think it's really important that there is a space within motorsports for large manufacturers to innovate and explore and push the limits. That's kind of what motorsports has always been, is for those companies to be able to try new things.
And to demonstrate, this is what our car can do, like at the most maximum outcome, which you would never need to achieve. Imagine how great it'll be for you on a day-to-day basis.
And testing it in areas of under high pressure for 24 hours straight. I remember back in Le Mans where there was like the new hybrid technology or the diesel motors or the whatever else it was. Like manufacturers were working on new things constantly and putting them to the test. And so I think going back to BOP, and I think this is a great way to kind of like encompass if your opinion of BOP is negative, meaning you don't like the balance of performance and there's too much restrictions or you feel like that, then yeah, like we shouldn't eliminate BOP in its existence now and what series it's involving now, but open up a new class within endurance racing, within WEC, within IMSA, mainly for the major races like the 24 Hours of Daytona and the 24 Hours of Le Mans, but open up a class that's like a little bit more freedom. Allow these manufacturers to come into that class and do whatever the hell they want. And same thing with the GT category. Bring back GT2 or GT1 and tell these guys, all right, you can bring your GT3 car and completely uncap it and go for it and create different bodywork, do something neat, but still have the BOP class, because I think it is successful in what it's trying to accomplish. It's introduced so many new teams to get involved in racing. It's blown up motorsports. It's created these large fields, really good racing. So it's like, if you love BOP, keep it. If you think that we should have more BOP, we don't. Go watch some spec racing, go watch NASCAR, IndyCar, whatever else. Like there's other stuff that like you can have the identical race car and you can watch that racing and that's for you. Then if you don't like BOP, if you're like, hey, let's eliminate BOP, it's like, I think it has its place. It's helping motorsports. But then, for these sanctioning bodies to create an organization or to create a racing class where there's just a little bit less rules, not unlimited rules. I don't think we should go back to that because I think that has its drawbacks as well, but allowing a little bit more freedom, maybe like the 919 Tribute or those other cars that kind of push the limits a little bit. Like, let those cars race at Le Mans. Like, give them a platform to race.
Le Mans is the perfect platform for this, right? There's been a lot of experimentation historically at Le Mans as well. And imagine not having had the opportunity to see any of those innovations take place there. We would never have the information. We would never have the derivative technology that we were able to develop or whatever it is, or the proof of concept that thing didn't work. Like we tried it and it didn't go the way we expected, and so much
Nissan
of that.
Delta Wing.
Nissan Delta Wing was the first one that came to my mind for Le Mans. There was a car called Le Monstre, like in the 1950s, made by a guy named Briggs Cunningham, that looked like it wouldn't even travel through the air. It looked like a brick on wheels. It was just ugly as hell. The Mazda 787B, that rotary car, right, that they eventually made no longer legal to race. What a cool innovation that was. What an amazing sound that car makes. It's so cool to see. We would not have that car in the history of racing if that class didn't allow for the innovation that led to that car's existence.
Well,
and the Delta Wing too.
And how unfortunate that they created a rule set that car couldn't race the next season. It's like, well, if we're trying to develop technologies and we want to develop rotary technology and rotary engines and make them more reliable, because everyone says a rotary is unreliable, it's like, Well, it survived 24 hours. So it's like if Mazda could have continued that project and the sanctioning body allowed that to happen at the 24 Hours of Le Mans, what could we have imagined that we could have had in our road cars of rotary engines?
Yeah, and even for the spec series, there are spec series that have multiple makes. So in NASCAR, you have a couple of options, right? You have Chevy, you have Ford, and you have Toyota. Those are your options. It's still a spec series within those three.
Right.
So you could have something similar at the top levels of racing where there were a few flavors of options available. In LMP3, there were a few different manufacturers, and for a while, Norma, now known as Duquesne, was the most successful. And then later on, the Ligier cars became more successful. Ginetta and Adeste never really got out of the gate. So for a little while, all the most successful teams were buying Normas. And then the next year, when the regulations changed and the new Evo version of the LMP3 car came out, the Ligier was faster. So all the teams started buying it. And I don't think that's actually a problem. They're opting into the platform that looks like will make them more successful within the confines and constraints of this spec definition. I think we can live with both of these. So there's the sort of uncapped world. There's the very strictly defined world, BOP. There's complete spec like Global MX Cup. Those cars are all the same, right? There's no variation really among them. It's just setup differences. And then you have this world where there's spec series, but there's a few different flavors or options within it. And you can choose among those, but those are still fixed. And I think we can have all those things together if we are careful to permute technological innovations from that top level into those other series, not apply BOP and constraints in places where we want innovation and more open rule book. We want to see more new things and different things. I think we can do it, but BOP alone isn't going to be the one hammer that we have so everything looks like a nail.
Yeah, I think like BOP is great and it's fine. I just wish that endurance racing would encompass kind of what it represented for a handful of years, handful of decades of allowing this additional innovation. And maybe this conversation is really just strictly to like Le Mans, because like Le Mans in and of itself, the 24 Hours of Le Mans, it's like that's its own independent race amongst the WEC season, right? Because there's the whole season of racing, and then there's these major events, and it'd be cool to see kind of Le Mans open up some rule books a little bit more for like what they allow there. And we saw what Hendrick Motors did with the Garage 56 project and stuff like that, of like just creating a more accepting atmosphere for like the oddball stuff and encouraging teams, manufacturers to develop kind of cool one-off cars. Like even that Aston Martin that we talked about, of that random things that's going to be made for a rich guy that's never going to exist. It's like, oh my God, could you imagine if you convinced Aston Martin and that individual of like, go race that thing at the 24 Hours of Le Mans and see what it can do.
Absolutely.
See if it can dominate the hypercars. Why aren't we pushing more of these fun one-off projects to just like go see what we can do? And, we're kind of in this phase of motorsports where everyone's just so complacent with the rule sets that we have now, the constraints that we have within BOP and all that sort of stuff, and just enjoying that we have so many cars and such good racing, but we're losing that taste and that flavor of like pushing the limits and having weird one-off things and like doing the creative exploration of motorsports that like is really cool and does last in the history books forever.
And the only way we get the innovations of the Jim Halls of the world, the Bruce McLarens, the Briggs Cunninghams of the world, the Nissan Delta Wings of the world, is to allow those things to exist and to create an environment that fosters that sort of innovation and pushing the envelope. And Le Mans is a perfect place for that. Like maybe it's not the 12 hours of Sebring to go try out all the new things the first time around, or maybe it is. There's different ways for us to decide what are the right venues, what are the right forms and structures to try this stuff out. And I think, again, if we open up the classes in such a way, it's LMP1, it's GT1, kind of the flavor like they used to be, that they weren't completely open rule books, but they were fairly liberal. There's a term a lot of people use called Formula Libre, which refers to the same thing, like an open and free set of rules, but not formula in the terms of an open wheel, open cockpit car alone, right? This is for all cars that are going to be racing. We want to give them this chance to have more freedom and more creativity with what they create, because that yields better results for all of us. If you're a motorsports fan or just somebody who likes cars, you're going to see cooler things on the road and out there racing if we allow people to try things, to be different, to give them incentives to expand the field from what we know already is working.
I think it's interesting that within this conversation of like starting off with BOP of like, yeah, BOP, get rid of it. And then it's like, maybe like there is a place for BOP, but we can build off of it. And I think that's the biggest thing is not, being the overarching hammer of like, eliminate this. It's like, let's add on to it. we're seeing such great success within motorsports right now, especially in the endurance racing world. And it's like, enjoy that success, but also take that momentum and allow something else to kind of happen and grow from it. And I don't know. I don't know where I stand on BOP. I think it's fine. Like, I wish it wasn't such a weird technological conversation. Like, I don't have the attention span or the patience to like deal with BOP. I like what it produces in terms of racing. I wish that it wasn't so complicated and there wasn't as many knobs and you just do enough to make the racing good. But I think it is kind of a necessary evil for the most part.
A small number of constraints really does help to open up creativity and options, right? Sometimes the hardest thing to start from is a blank piece of paper. So, draw a box and just know that you have to be within the box, but you can draw anything you want within that box. And I think that's what we're talking about here, just about sort of optimizing for the activities that we're talking about. And if what we really want to see is who is the best driver in the world, and independent of machinery and racetrack and all those things, just who has the driving skills, right? A spec series, everybody in the same kind of car at the same place, is probably a better way of evaluating that than what constructor makes the most powerful or fastest or race-winningest car in the world, because those are two different things. And all the way back in 1900, there was a race called the Paris-Toulouse-Paris race. 1900. They considered that an unofficial Olympic sport at the time. So fast forward 125 plus years, we don't consider motorsports anywhere near the Olympics. Well, why? Because it's so variable and it's not about human accomplishment alone. But part of it is, like if we go back to that spec who's the fastest driver thing, that attempt that we've made through various series around the world, IROC and others, to say who's really the best racer, that's answering a different question than who is the winner of this series. And let's just keep that in mind as we evaluate these things, and let's continue to push the envelope for making these series able to produce cars that push the envelope and give us new things to look at and are exciting and innovative. And if there's other places we're trying to evaluate other aspects of that, do that in the right place. Create the forum for that, and it's maybe different than the way we're doing it today.
I think that's what's so crazy is like motorsports is so variable. And like, yeah, if you're more interested in the driver and that part of the sport is the person behind the wheel, then you want to watch a spec series or, kind of like a stock class.
Right.
But then if you're the person that's really into the cars and the innovations and the exploration of what's possible from an engineering perspective, there's series that are completely different from that. And it's 100% a spectrum between those things. And, I think BOP is the biggest thing that's trying to bridge that gap of allowing there to be the exploration and the differences of the vehicles, but still trying to put the drivers at the forefront of, these cars, yes, they're different. Yes, they're unique. And we're allowing these manufacturers to make their own thing and promote what they want to promote. But we also want to make sure that our drivers have equal playing fields, that it's like, oh, if you didn't get the ride with Ford, you're not going to be able to win the championship. So it's interesting, the spectrum that exists, what BOP is trying to do to bridge that gap together. And it seems like racing fans in general, it's like you're never happy with what you have because there's always that other thing that could be added to it.
Yeah, absolutely. We want more. We want better, faster, more exciting, more entertainment. Like that's kind of what we're after with all this stuff.
I think we are in a good era of endurance racing, and it's going to be exciting to see what these organizations do moving forward and what paths they take if they lean more in on BOP. And they're obviously going to continue to develop that process, and I think it is going to continue to get better. And it would be really cool if they kind of saw the opportunity to allow that creativity to shine through a little bit more at some of those marquee events as well. So this has been fun of arguing maybe about BOP or just, going around in circles of what is BOP and why do we care and do we really care and is it that evil thing or maybe it's just fine and just watch racing, enjoy it.
I think we could all agree that you can't have suboptimal without BOP.
Well, this has been a great conversation. Thanks, Todd.
Thanks, Silas.
And thanks for listening. This has been Cold Start.